For 11 years, my mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility, so my father wouldn't have to find out how close we were to losing the house after his back surgery. She never told him. I found out by accident at 16 when I was looking for a pen in her nightstand drawer and found a stack of overdue notices she'd been hiding under her Bible. That's the woman my mother-in-law tried to humiliate in the driveway of a house I bought with my own money. My name is Cora Tillman, and I'm 34 years old. I've been a registered nurse for 11 years, and for the last 6 of those, I've worked in the cardiac ICU at a Level I trauma center outside of Nashville. The hours are brutal. The pay, if you're strategic about it, is not. I picked up overtime shifts other people didn't want. Holidays, overnight rotations, weekend doubles, and I kept a second job as a per diem home health nurse 2 Saturdays a month. For 4 years, every dollar from that second job went untouched into a savings account I named simply for them. Not a vacation fund, not a car fund, not the kitchen renovation my husband Felix had been mentioning since we moved into our house in Brentwood 3 years ago. My mother loved to cook and had spent 40 years doing it in a galley kitchen with 2 working burners and a wall oven that took 20 minutes to preheat. My father had driven a school bus for 32 years, the same district, the same routes, until the arthritis in his hands got bad enough that his supervisor quietly suggested early retirement. He took it without complaint and spent the next year pretending he was fine. They had been married for 40 years last April. 40 years of exactly the kind of life nobody makes movies about. Steady, careful, a little bit hard, and held together entirely by 2 people who chose each other over and over without ever making a production of it. They lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house in Clarksville they'd bought the year I was born. The carpet was original, the windows drafted in winter. The neighbors had a dog that barked until 11 on weeknights, and my father had never once complained to them about it. I wanted to give them something they would never give themselves. I wanted it to be something they couldn't hand back. So 8 months before their anniversary, I started looking. I knew what I wanted. Something with land, not too far from Nashville so I could still get there on a day off, but far enough to feel like an escape. Something with a porch. My mother had talked her entire life about wanting a porch with a view of something green. Not a subdivision. Not another neighbor's fence. Actual green. I found it in March, listed for 6 days before I called my realtor. 4 acres outside of Leiper's Fork, 45 minutes southwest of Nashville. A white farmhouse built in 1978, renovated in 2019, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a wraparound porch that faced a ridgeline of eastern red cedars, and a small pond at the back of the property that caught the evening light in a way that made the listing photos look almost too good to be real. The asking price was $389,000. I offered $375,000. They countered at $382,000, and I didn't sleep the night before closing. I paid the down payment myself. I took a personal loan against my 401(n), contributions to cover the gap between what I'd saved and what I needed to close, a decision my financial advisor told me was not ideal and which I made anyway because some things are not financial decisions. I kept 2 people in the loop, my brother Marcus, my brother Theo, who lives outside of Portland and helped me coordinate the logistics by phone, and my realtor, who signed a confidentiality agreement at my request, and who later told me it was the most emotionally complicated transaction she'd handled in 20 years. My husband Felix knew only that I had something planned for my parents' anniversary. I didn't tell him the specifics because I was afraid that if too many people knew, the surprise would unravel. That decision would later cost me sleep, because the person who took advantage of the information gap was someone I should have known better than to trust with a key. Let me explain how Felix's mother ended up with access to the property. Her name is Roberta. She and her husband Norman have been married for 38 years and have never once let Felix or me forget that their marriage has lasted longer than ours has. Roberta is the kind of woman who arrives at your house without calling first and then comments on the dishes in your drying rack. She once told me, at Thanksgiving, in front of 6 family members, that she was surprised I'd been promoted to charge nurse given how young you still look. She said it smiling. She always says things smiling. For 6 years, I had absorbed Roberta's comments the way you learn to absorb background noise. Registering it, not reacting, moving forward. Felix always said he'd talk to her. He always meant it. It never quite happened in the way that mattered. 2 weeks before my parents' anniversary, I asked Felix to go to the farmhouse ahead of time to let in the cleaning crew and check that the porch furniture I'd ordered had been delivered. He offered, without being asked, to also have his parents stop by to hang some of the banner decorations I'd described. I'd mentioned wanting a welcome sign and a few lanterns along the porch railing, because they lived closer to Leiper's Fork than we did, and it would save me a trip. I said yes. I gave Roberta a key. I should have known from how quickly she offered. It was almost too eager the way she said, of course, we'd love to help. In hindsight, that word, love, should have flagged something. Roberta does not love to help. Roberta loves to be involved in things, which is different. I found out what she'd done the way I found out most things about Roberta. Too late, and in front of my mother. The anniversary was a Sunday. I'd asked my parents to drive up to Nashville for the weekend under the pretense of celebrating at a restaurant. I told them I'd made reservations somewhere nice and we'd make a whole day of it. My mother wore the ivory cardigan she saves for occasions she considers special. My father wore a tie. They had driven 2 hours from Clarksville and were staying at a Hampton Inn off I-65 because my mother refuses to stay in anyone's house and make extra work for them, a position she has held for my entire life and that I have stopped arguing with. I picked them up at 11. Felix had driven out separately to Leiper's Fork the night before to set things up. The photo display I'd had printed and framed, a catered spread from a barbecue place my mother loves, mason jar lights strung from the porch ceiling, a vinyl banner that read 40 years and still our home that I'd designed myself. My brother had overnighted a memory book he'd been assembling for 3 months. Photos, letters from family, a note from my mother's oldest friend in Alabama. The drive from the Hampton Inn to Leiper's Fork takes 51 minutes. I know because I have driven it in my mind approximately 400 times since that day. My mother spent most of it asking about the restaurant, what kind of food, whether it was fancy, whether she was dressed okay. I told her she looked beautiful, which she did, and that she was going to love it, which I believed. When I turned off the main road onto the gravel drive, she got quiet the way she gets when she doesn't want to ask a question she's already half answered for herself. My father leaned forward slightly in the passenger seat. He used to do that when we'd pull into a parking lot as kids. That forward lean, like he was trying to see ahead of the moment. And then I saw the porch. The mason jar lights were gone. Not burned out, gone, unstrung, coiled up on the porch railing in a loose pile, like someone had meant to dispose of them and run out of time. The banner I'd designed was not hanging from the ceiling where I'd stretched it 2 days earlier during a dry run. In its place, at the far end of the porch, was a bistro table I didn't own with a floral centerpiece I didn't buy, and next to it, 2 rocking chairs with decorative pillows that I had also never seen in my life. And standing in the open doorway of my parents' house. The house with their names on the deed, the house I had signed and closed on without ever saying the words aloud to anyone outside of the transaction, was Roberta. She was wearing a linen blouse. She had her arms crossed loosely, not defensively, the way someone stands in their own kitchen when company arrives, and she was smiling. My mother got out of the car first, the way she always does. Door open before the engine is fully off, moving before she's thought about it. She made it maybe 10 feet up the gravel path before Roberta descended the porch steps. What happened next is something I have replayed in my mind so many times that I've had to actively resist the urge to narrate it to myself like evidence. Roberta pointed. Not at me. At my mother. A single extended finger aimed at the direction of the road, and then she said, in the same pleasant, carrying voice she uses to comment on dish racks and promotions, "I'm sorry, this is a private property. You're going to need to turn around." My mother stopped walking. She turned to look at me, and the expression on her face was the worst thing I've seen in 34 years of being her daughter. Not anger, confusion. Deep, quiet confusion. The kind that comes when the world doesn't make sense yet, and your brain hasn't caught up to the humiliation still incoming. She looked at me the way a person looks when they need the person they trust most to explain what's happening. My father was at the back of the car. He'd come around to the passenger side to take my mother's arm the way he always does on uneven ground. Gravel, steps, icy parking lots. He's done it for 40 years without being asked, his hand appearing at her elbow before she even notices the terrain has changed. He froze when he heard Roberta's voice. His head came up slowly. His jaw set in a way I recognized from exactly one other moment in my life. The morning of my grandmother's funeral, when the funeral director said something careless about the casket, and my father did not raise his voice but became very, very still. I was still at the driver's side door. I had not moved. I was holding my keys. Inside the house, through the front windows, I could see shapes moving. At least 2 people, maybe 3. Furniture that was not mine. A stack of boxes near the foot of the staircase that I had never placed there. A lamp on the side table by the door. A lamp that I knew for certain was not in the house when I'd done my walkthrough 48 hours earlier because I had checked every room. They had moved in, or begun to. The key I'd handed Roberta to hang a banner and place a few lanterns had become, in her mind, something else entirely. I walked forward. The gravel is loud underfoot, and Roberta heard me before she saw me, and the half-second between hearing footsteps and registering that it was me, that single half-second, told me everything I'd been excusing for 6 years. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had prepared for this conversation and was now deciding which version to deliver. "Cora," she said, adjusting her posture slightly. "I'm so glad you're here. I was just explaining to." She gestured vaguely toward my mother without finishing the sentence or, notably, acknowledging that the woman she'd just ordered off the property was my mother, a fact she was certainly aware of. "What are you doing in this house?" I said. I did not say it like a question. We wanted to help get things ready. Norman and I thought, given everything Felix has mentioned about eventually wanting a property outside the city. Felix has mentioned. We assumed this was something you were planning as a family investment, and we thought it would be a lovely surprise if we had things set up before. Before what? She paused. She had not expected me to keep interrupting. Roberta is accustomed to people letting her finish. "Before the celebration," she said, landing on a word vague enough to mean anything. My mother was still standing in the same spot on the gravel path. She had not moved forward, and she had not moved back. My father had his hand at her elbow now. Not because the terrain was uneven, but because he was holding on to her, and she was holding on to him, and both of them were watching me with the particular silence of people who understand something has gone wrong, but who do not yet know what they are standing in the middle of. I turned to them. And I said the thing I had planned to say under entirely different circumstances, in a voice that came out steadier than I expected. "Mom, Dad, I need you to come up to this porch." My mother looked at me. "This is yours," I said. "I bought it for you. It has been yours since March. Everything in it. The furniture I picked, the porch, the pond out back, those 4 acres. Yours. Your names are on the deed. They have been for 6 months." My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father said nothing. He took one step forward and then stopped, and I watched something move through his face that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't just shock, it wasn't just relief. It was the specific expression of a man who has carried something for a very long time and has just been told he can set it down. Behind me, Roberta said, "Cora, I think there's been a—" "There hasn't," I said, still looking at my parents. "There's nothing to clarify. You had a key to a house that does not belong to you or to Felix or to anyone in your family. You used it to move your belongings into a home that was purchased as a private gift for 2 other people, and you told my mother to leave the property she owns." I heard the front door open behind me. Felix came out onto the porch, and I knew from the way he moved, deliberate, like he'd been working up to it, that he had been inside, that he had seen more than he'd let on when he called me from the road the night before to say, "Things look great, can't wait for tomorrow." He stopped at the top of the porch steps and looked at his mother. "Mom," he said, "where did you get the idea this property was for us?" Roberta opened her mouth. "I didn't tell you that," he said before she could answer. "I told you we'd been talking about maybe, eventually, looking at land outside the city. I said maybe and eventually, and you turned it into a reason to move your furniture into my wife's parents' house." He came down one step. "You need to tell me what is in there that isn't Cora's at Felix. We were only, how much of it?" His voice was quiet in a way I'd never heard from him before. Not cold. Exactly. Tighter than cold. Like something he'd been holding in a loose fist for a long time had finally closed. "How much of it is yours?" Norman appeared in the doorway behind him, and he had the look of a man who had known for some time that this was coming, and had chosen not to stop it, and was now watching the consequences arrive, and finding them exactly as he'd expected. "The rocking chairs," Norman said quietly. "The bistro set, the lamp in the entryway, a few boxes in the second bedroom." Felix looked at his father for a long moment. Then he walked past his mother down the porch steps, past me, past my parents, and opened the back of his truck. He didn't say anything else, he just started carrying things out. Norman followed him. He didn't speak either. He picked up the bistro table first, folded it closed, carried it to the bed of their car with the particular deliberateness of a man performing penance. I stood on the porch with my mother and watched. Roberta remained on the porch for a while. She straightened the coiled lights I hadn't asked her to remove. She adjusted the pillow on one of the rocking chairs her husband was in the process of carrying to their vehicle. She was doing the thing she always did in uncomfortable moments, staying in motion so it couldn't land on her. Then she turned to me, and for the first time in 6 years of knowing her, her voice did not have that smooth, angled quality that could pass for warmth if you didn't know where to listen. "I thought we were becoming one family," she said. I looked at her for a moment. "Becoming one family doesn't mean my parents' names disappear from a deed," I said. "It doesn't mean you get to redirect a gift I worked 4 years to build. And it doesn't mean you get to stand in my mother's driveway and tell her to leave." She didn't answer. "I've spent 6 years giving you the benefit of the doubt on a lot of things," I said. "This one I don't have any doubt about." They were gone within the hour. Norman drove. Roberta sat in the passenger seat and looked forward, and I watched the car until it turned off the gravel drive and disappeared behind the cedar line. Then I went inside and got the mason jar lights from the porch railing where they'd been coiled up, and Felix helped me restring them from the ceiling hooks I'd installed 2 days earlier. And by the time the sun started dropping behind the ridge, the porch looked the way I had imagined it for 8 months. We ate outside. The catering kept everything warm in insulated trays, and my mother ate 2 plates of pulled pork and told my father 3 times that she couldn't believe the porch, couldn't believe the view, couldn't believe any of it. My father sat in the Adirondack chair I'd ordered in October and looked out at the pond and did not say much for a long time, which is how I've always known when something has actually reached him. At one point he said, "You didn't have to do this, Bug. He hasn't called me Bug since I was 9. "I know," I said. "We would have been fine." "I know you would have," I said. "That's not why I did it." He nodded slowly, looking at the water. He reached over and put his hand on top of mine for a second, and then he went back to looking at the pond, and I let him. My mother, at some point after the sun was fully down, came and found me in the kitchen where I was boxing up the leftover food, and she stood in the doorway for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said, "That woman told me to leave." "I know. She told me to leave this house." "I know, Mom." She was quiet for another beat. Then she said, "I want you to know I'm not going to let that be the thing I remember about today." I looked up at her. "I'm going to remember the porch," she said, "and the pond. And the way your father looked when you said our names were on the deed." She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me, and she smelled the way she has smelled my entire life. The same lotion, the same particular warmth, and I stood in the kitchen of the house I'd bought them and held on. Felix and I drove home late that night. We didn't talk much for the first 20 minutes. Then he said, without looking away from the road, "I should have seen it coming. You couldn't have known she'd do that far." "No," he said, "but I've been letting her push the line for a long time, and this is where it ended up." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry it happened in front of your mom. So am I." He drove for a while. Then he said, "My dad's going to have a hard couple of weeks." "I know." "He knew," Felix said. "He knew what she was doing, and he didn't stop it." "I know that too." There was nothing more to say about it that night, and we both seemed to understand that, and the rest of the drive home was quiet. I spoke to my mother the following Tuesday. She had driven back to Clarksville the day before, and I called her on my lunch break. She had already started talking about where she was going to put her sewing machine. She was thinking the second bedroom, the one with the east-facing window, because the light in the morning would be good for it. She had not been up to see the pond yet, but she was planning to walk out there that weekend, when my father's friend from his bus driving days came to visit. She wanted him to see the property too. She sounded, for the first time in longer than I could track, like she was making plans, not careful ones, not provisional ones, plans that assumed she was going to be somewhere for a while and that the somewhere was hers. That's the thing about giving someone a home. It's not the structure, it's not the square footage or the pond or the porch with the ridgeline view. It's the assumption embedded in all of it, that you belong here, that this space has your name on it, that no one can arrive in a linen blouse and point at the road and tell you to turn around. 40 years of putting everything into a life for other people. 40 years of double shifts hidden under a Bible. 32 years of the same bus routes in Clarksville, the same district, the same careful management of everything that might otherwise tip sideways. They had earned more than a farmhouse outside of Nashville. But the farmhouse was what I had, and it was enough.